Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Monday. Today we have two things to do. The first thing we're going to do is talk about a little bit of a project that you have that will be due on Friday. The other thing that you guys are going to do is read a little bit of Among the Hidden and answer questions on Socrative. All right, so the topic of your project is you are going to be designing a poster. But before we can do that, we need to look at this idea of propaganda. Okay, so propaganda is a information, okay, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view, right? So it's basically someone trying to mislead you or give you an impression about something in order to get your attention. Okay, they want you to believe whatever it is they believe. Okay, a lot of times propaganda is used in marketing to get you to behave a certain way. So let's look. All right. So again, the purpose of propaganda is to make you do something you might not normally do, or to change your mind about a certain idea. Right. So again, propaganda is used all over commercials and on posters to kind of make you see the world in a different way. Now, we're going to be looking at a couple of different types of propaganda. There's all kinds of different kinds. I would say there's probably around 40 to 50 different techniques that people use to do propaganda. I'm only going to focus on four of them. Again, realize that there are other ones, but these are just four that I want you guys to look at. Again, there are many techniques that some advertisers, those are people who are trying to get you to do something, use to try to make you change your opinion. And again, here are just a few. All right, so one technique that people use for propagandic purposes is appealing to fear. Okay, appeals to fear seek to build support by instilling anxieties and panic in the general population, right? So they want the average person who sees an image or hears something or sees something to think, oh, that's going to scare me or that's a frightening. And they have an example here of Joseph Goebbels exploiting Theodor Kaufmann's Germany Must Perish to claim that Allies sought the extermination of the German people, right? So this German tried to make it sound like people were out to kill all of Germany. So he overreacted. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of appeals to fear that'll be a little bit easier to see. Okay, so these are some posters that are made and they're playing on your fears. So you have the one here on the left where it says stop climate change before it changes you, right? So that when you see that image, you're like, oof, I don't want that happening to me, right? That seems scary. The one on the top talks about hit at 40 miles per hour, and then they show a skull. There's a 70% chance you'll die. And then at hit at 30 miles per hour, there's an 87% chance you'll live, right? So they're basically trying to scare people into making sure they're only driving 30 miles per hour. The bottom one is an example of someone who's got 20 amputations, so her fingers have been cut off. So by using this image of somebody with their fingers cut off, it's kind of like scaring people into agreeing with their idea. Okay, in this case, it's to not smoke. Okay, another idea that is a type of propaganda is using a bandwagon mentality. So you might have heard this term bandwagon before, right? So a bandwagon or an inevitable victory appeals attempt to persuade the targeting audience to join in and take course of action that everybody else is taking, right? So it's basically like, oh, everyone else is doing it, so you should do it. Okay, so the inevitable victory invites those not already on the bandwagon to join those already on the road to certain victory. Those are already, or at least partially on the bandwagon, are reassured to stay on board. Right? So it's basically like, well, we're going to win anyway, so you might as well join up. That's bandwagon. And again, join the crowd. This technique reinforces people's natural desire to be on the winning side. This technique is used to convince the audience that a program is an expression of an irresistible mass movement and that's their best interest, right? So everybody's doing it, you should do it, right? So some examples of bandwagoning that you might see is trust the brand more dentists and hygienists use. So they're basically saying, well, if these people are using it, you should. Again, there's a Modern Warfare 2, everyone is doing it. And then you have a McDonald's hamburger sign, over 99 billion served, right? So saying that everyone eats there. Okay, now another type of propaganda is black and white fallacy. So what this is you're presenting only two possible choices, with the product or idea being propagated as the better choice. Okay, so they have this: you're either with us or against us. Okay, so what they basically do is they make you, they give you two different options, even though in the reality there's probably other choices that are possible. But if I give you two options, I make it seem like there's only two choices, where in reality, there's never just two choices in life. There's always other options. So if you look at some examples of a black and white fallacy, right, it says USA, love it or leave it. So there's basically saying you have to either love the US or you have to get out of here, right? Another example is vote or die, right? Obviously, if you don't vote, there's not really a threat of death. And then the last one here is would you rather, who would you rather see live, right? So you have a mouse or you have a human, right? So that's obviously an ad for research on animals, right? So they're saying, well, would you rather see your children die, right? So again, these are examples of a black and white fallacy. All right, and then the last one I want you to look at is this idea of a glittering generality. Okay, so general is being vague. So glittering generalities are emotionally appealing words that are applied to a product or idea, but they don't present any concrete argument or analysis. So it's just like a nice thing to say or something that gets someone's emotions going, but it doesn't really have any logic or argument. So this technique has also been referred to as the P.T. Barnum effect. The advertising campaign slogan, Ford has a better idea, right? So again, by saying someone has a better idea without even really saying what that idea is, doesn't really use your sense of logic. It's just making you say that this person has good ideas. So let's take a look at some of what glittering generalities look like, right? So creamy, dreamy, icy, chocolatey, right? It's not really telling you anything there. It's just basically describing things. What does it mean to be dreamy? Big, beefy bliss. What does this really mean, right? And then obviously, "Make America Great Again." What is really being said by that phrase, right? Is it really telling you what does it mean to be great, right? So what I want you guys to do is you're basically going to be using these techniques to create a uh, poster that Jen and Luke will be using for their rally, right? So let's take a look at what I want you to do. So, all right, there's two slides I have done for you on here. You're basically going to just add more slides onto it and then create your slides right underneath. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a poster for Jen and a poster for Luke for the rally. So you need to have two. There's certain criteria that you need to have. Okay. So what is it? Your posters have to contain the following. So you have to choose out of the ones I just went over, you have to choose two different types of propaganda, either appeal to fear, bandwagon, black and white, um, or a glittering generality. Okay. Again, your slides that you create, your poster, has to have at least one image. You have to have at least one phrase on your poster, and the text has to be visible. What do I mean by that? You have to make it big. Okay, so your text should be a pretty large size font so that if I was holding this poster up, people would be able to see it. Okay, and then obviously some of the information that you have on your slide has to be related to the novel. Okay, so it has to deal with the issues that the characters are facing in Among the Hidden. Okay, all right. So again, you need to have two slides. This is due Friday, right? Make sure that you get started on it, but don't worry about finishing it. Okay. Now, what we're going to do next is we are going to read the next chapter. After you are done with that chapter, you're going to go on to Socrative and answer some questions. Okay, so remember, this is where Luke has just found out a lot of information about Jen and the fact that she's been talking to all these other kids who are the same position as Luke. And now he's on his way home. Chapter 19. Luke left Jen's that day with a pile of books and computer printouts clutched to his chest. "Some reading material for you," she'd said, "so you'll understand." Back in his own room, Luke sat down on his bed and opened the first book. It was thick and carried its title in ominous black letters, "The Population Disaster." The type inside was small and closely spaced. Luke read a sentence at random. "While debate continues over carrying capacity of the Earth," he skipped ahead, "if the total fertility rate in industrialized countries had remained at or below 2.1, Luke saw that reading this book would be like puzzling out the letters Dad got from the government. He glanced at the other two books, The Famine Years Revisited and The Population Reversal. They looked no easier. The computer printouts were at least brief, but both the problems of the shadows and the population law, our country's biggest mistake, were full of big words. Luke sighed. He was tempted to put the books aside and just ask Jen to explain them to him. And he might have, except for what she'd just said as she begun handing them to him. "Oh my gosh, I didn't think you could read. Can't you?" "Of course," Luke had answered stiffly. "I was reading in the chat room, wasn't I?" "Yeah, but you could have been, oh, never mind. I've offended you again, haven't I? Me and my big mouth. It wouldn't have been anything to be ashamed of. even if you couldn't. Oh, I'm making things worse. I'll shut up here. And it had seemed to Luke that she'd pull even bigger books off the bookshelves after that. Now, he resolutely turned to the beginning of the population disaster and began reading. Since some elements of the overpopulation crisis were foreseen in the 1800s, an uninformed observer could only wonder why humankind came so near to total annihilation. But Luke reached for the dictionary and settled in for the long haul. It rained for the next several days, so Luke read constantly, not even tempted to race over to Jen's instead. He could hear Dad banging around downstairs, stomping in and out of the barn or the machine shed. Now that the harvest was in, Luke thought Dad might be bored without the pigs to take out care of, so Luke read cautiously, always ready to shove his population book under his window and replace it with one of his adventure books. The preparation paid off on the fourth day when he heard his dad's footsteps up the stairs. Hey, look, Luke, what you up to? Nothing, Luke said, turning Treasure Island right side up at the very last moment. Dad didn't notice. Do you want to play cards? They played rummy on Luke's bed. Luke could feel the corner of the population disaster poking his back through the entire game. He kept wanting to ask Dad about what he was learning. He spent most of the first game biting his tongue. Dad won. Again? Dad asked, shuffling the cards. You haven't had any work to do. November, no livestock. Only work I've got now is figuring out how we're going to pay the bills since when the hog money runs out. Isn't there some way to grow stuff inside during the winter, like down in the basement with special lights, lots of water, and extra minerals? Then you could sell it. Luke asked without thinking. He had just finished reading a chapter on the population book about hydroponics. Dad squinted. Seems I did hear tell of that once. So hydroponics is the idea of growing stuff with just water. Luke won the next hand. Dad didn't seem to be concentrating. At the end, Dad said, "You mind if we quit now?" Luke was terrified Dad would ask where he heard of hydroponics, so he just said, "No, no problem." Dad left muttering, growing food inside. Luke wished he had the nerve to ask about the population law or the famines or even some of the family history. Once he got past the dense language, the books Jen had loaned him were full of revelations. At best he could understand it, the world had simply gotten too full of people about 20 years earlier. Poor countries had it particularly bad, and people there often starved or were malnourished. But then something worse happened. Terrible droughts struck the parts of the world that always grew the most food. For 3 years, they grew almost nothing. People everywhere starved. In Luke's country, the government began rationing food, only allowing people to have 1,500 calories a day. To make sure there was food, they seized control of all food production. They forced factories that had made junk food to crank out healthy food instead. They forced farmers to move to land that would be more likely to produce. Is that why we live near our grandparents? Luke wanted to ask his parents. But the government didn't think that was enough. They wanted to make sure there would never again be more people than the farmers could feed, so they passed the population law too. In the evenings, spooning in his stew or cutting up his meat, Luke felt pangs of guilt now. Perhaps someone was starving someplace because of him, but the food wasn't there wherever the starving people were. It was here on his plate. He ate it all. Luke, you're so quiet lately. Is everything all right? Mother asked one night when he was waved away his second helping of cabbage. I'm fine, he said, and he went back to eating silently. But he was worrying that maybe the government was right and that he shouldn't exist. Till only when he got to the two computer printouts did he begin to feel better. One of the articles began, "The population law is evil." The other said, "Hundreds of children are hidden, mistreated, starved, neglected, abused, and even murdered for no reason. Forcing children into the shadows can be counted as a genocide." How can this be? He asked Jen a week later when he finally got a chance to go back to her house. How can the books and the articles be so different? She handed him a glass of soda. What do you mean? She asked. Luke pointed to the population disaster. This book says the human race would have gone extinct if we hadn't had this population law. This one, he held up and shook the problem of the shadows article. This says the population law was totally unnecessary and cruel. It says there was plenty of food, even during the famines, except the barons were hoarding it. Belatedly, he remembered that Jen was a baron. Oh, sorry. Jen shrugged, not the least bit offended. What's the truth? He asked. Jen shook potato chips in a bowl. Well, think about it. The government allowed those books to be published. They probably even paid for them. So of course they're going to say what the government wants people to believe. It's just propaganda, lies. But the articles, the authors of those probably put themselves at risk getting the information, so they're right. Luke pondered that. Then why did you make me read the books? He asked. So you'd understand how stupid the government is, Jen said. So you'd understand why we have to make them see the truth. Luke looked at the stack of thick books on the Talbot's kitchen counter. They looked so official, so important. Who was he to say that they weren't true? All right, guys, so make sure you answer questions on Socrative. And again, make sure that you are working on the propaganda poster.